Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Marketing Crew. And for the sake of Andy, what I'd like to explain is why we're here. We have been gathering together, some of us for about 18 months now, and we have weekly discussions about your marketing, about the whole marketing strategy. And sometimes we'll discuss particular marketing tactics, as we're going to be doing today. But everything fits within a very sensible, practical framework. I've been involved in marketing for well over 40 years and 20 years helping people with the referral strategies. And I've always looked at the people I meet in business that sometimes they're misguided with marketing. They think it's about social media. They think it's about Facebook. And it's about 5 key pillars. And the 5 key pillars are very simple. It's first of all, audience. You need to be in front of the right audience. If you're not in front of the right audience, good morning, Debbie, and morning, Chris, then you may be talking to yourself. You're certainly talking to the wrong people. So it's identifying who that audience is that you can best serve and help with the problems that you solve or the products that solve their issues and problems. So audience is key. The second part of the framework is engagement. And to get engagement, you really have to grab their attention, get them to lean forward, often with curiosity, to begin that conversation. Now, it could be a verbal conversation. It could be a conversation on a website, on social media. It could involve video. It can involve whatever you feel comfortable with doing. But nevertheless, there has to be some engagement because we don't buy the first time we see somebody. It's said that 82% of all sales take place after the 7th touch. And then, of course, it comes to the sale. So we need to stay in touch. So then it comes to the sale itself and how you're selling. Are you selling off the page? Are you selling face-to-face? Are you selling after a consultation? Is it a one-off sale? Is it a repeat sale? Is it a subscription or whatever? So they're things that people need to be thinking about. So anything you're doing right now is under any of those categories: audience, engagement, sale. That's where most people think it ends. And what they tend to do is once we've got that sale, we get excited, we bank the money. That's when the sale exists. And we go back to that audience, hopefully, and take people through that pipeline or not. And many people are not taking enough people through the pipeline, as we discussed recently. The real key area is beyond the sale. Because if you've got a following of customers and clients, you want to make sure you retain those. You don't ignore them. So you need a retention strategy of some sort. And there's various ways we've discussed in the past and will in the future. But retention is really key. A lot of the retailers during COVID have not been able to retain their clients for various reasons, but they don't tend to. They accept people walking in, walking out, and they never, ever stay in touch. Amazon does. That's why they're losing their lunch to, one of the reasons they're losing their lunch to Amazon. So retention is really key. And who better to then introduce you to the audience you want to get into than your retained clients? And so the 5th pillar is referrals, introductions. It's quite a simple concept. We don't need to make marketing any more complicated than that. How you get those introductions back into where you want to be is not about going networking. It's about understanding what you're doing at networking. And that's something I've got an expertise in for over 20 years. So if anybody wants to have a separate session, and I'm going to ask you later, what other subjects would you like to see on here? Because referrals are important to everybody, especially in new business and building that awareness. So I hope that's been a good summary, mainly for Andy and mainly to remind Debbie as to why we're here and what we do. Now, I'm going to focus everybody today on the engagement bit. And when we engage with people, there's no better way to do that. And we tend to do it to a degree naturally, is we tell each other stories. Stories about our week, stories about what our kids have done, even stories about the England football team. And I won't say that anymore, Marcus. Rod's stories are sometimes not as ripe as we would wish, but nevertheless, he has a way on the market of engaging people. And I've felt, and we've had sessions, by the way, on storytelling in marketing, but today we've got 2 people, one of whom actually earns a living by telling stories, And the other one learns a living by photographing those stories or turning those stories into photographs. And I want to welcome AnnMarie and Nick. And I believe AnnMarie is going to be leading this. Am I right?
I'm starting.
Right. Okay. So who wants the slides? Do you want the presentation? Do you want the slides, or shall I cover them?
Are you able to do it? Is that all right? Because I shall just get very confused.
I'm quite skilled at this.
If
right.
we can say next chart, please, Paul, that would be good.
What's that?
If we can just say next chart, please, Paul, that'd be good.
That's absolutely brilliant. So we're all seeing that?
Yes.
Over to you guys.
Morning, everybody. Yes, so obviously last week, Paul asked if we would have a look at storytelling and how you can use that in your marketing. So Nick and I have come together and we've created this short presentation, but it means you're going to have to do some work, I'm afraid. So you don't just get to sit there and listen to us. But first of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about the written word, and then Nick's going to give you a little bit of background about the visual side of storytelling. Next slide, please, Paul. I've always wanted to say that. I feel so important now. So what is a story? Can anybody tell me? There's three phrases I'm going to give you here. Break the ice, all of a sudden, and a heart of gold. Anybody tell me what those three phrases have in common?
The stories.
Anyone?
Yes.
It stops people and changes their state.
Oh no, you're being very deep.
Oh, sorry.
Really not that. It's really not that.
It shows interest.
No.
Stories.
No, well, they might do, but no. The reason I've picked those three out is that they're three phrases that we use today. They were actually created by Shakespeare, who died in 1616. So all three of those phrases first appeared in one of his plays. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the power of the written word, because still, however many 400 years later, we are still using those words. And really, that's what it's all about. And the basis of a story is to look at it in terms of its structure. So a story in its most basic form has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every single story you tell, Paul referenced earlier on that you tell people about your children, etc., etc. If you actually think about it and break it down, your story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, in history, stories first came around in about 30,000 BC when they started putting sort of handprints and pictures up on the inside of caves. And then it kind of moved on, and we got to a period of around 1830 when there was the first sort of written story of that time. And I won't go into it because it's a long story, but if anybody wants to look at it, it's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And he was basically a hero of the ancient world. And it was a great long poem, pages and pages and pages, which catalogued his story. So the history of it obviously goes back a number of years. And as I've just said, we're still using them today. And the reason that you have a beginning and a middle and an end is so that you can actually get from point A to point C with a purpose. And it's the same when you're using it for your marketing. The beginning of your story is where you incite an incident. So it's where you introduce things, you start to give a little bit of an indication into what might be coming. The middle is where you increase the action. That's where all the kind of meaty stuff happens. And then the end is where you bring it all back together and you diffuse it and you give it a satisfactory conclusion. That doesn't mean it has to be a happy conclusion. It's just a satisfactory conclusion. So the questions that have been raised throughout the story are answered at the end. And just before I move on to Nick, there's just one word of caution. Obviously, words are very powerful. there's a lot in the press at the moment about things that have been said, you know, the sort of football team, etc. But there was something that I read the other day that really stuck with me, and it's just about when we're writing things down, we have to really think about what we're saying. And there's a journalist who writes for the Sunday Times called Christina Lamb. She wrote a piece about the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. And in her piece, she wrote, to her subjects, Prince Philip was the longest serving royal consort in British history, an often crotchety figure offending people with gaffes about slitty eyes, even if secretly we rather enjoyed them. Now, I read that as it was intended, as did a number of other people. The woman hasn't been able to leave her home since. She has had death threats, her family have been targeted, her son, her husband. So even though she wrote that in the way that I read it, and hopefully you guys heard it, there are people that have deliberately, or maybe not deliberately, misinterpreted it. So a word of caution: whenever you're writing anything, just be certain that it says what you want it to say. Okay, moving on to the next slide, please, and I shall hand over to my very able assistant.
I think there's a lot of mental illness in the community.
Yes.
Very sad, isn't it? Thanks, AnnMarie. Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to just do a little exercise, a little creative exercise to get you warmed up before the main part of the workshop. So what I'm going to do is, in a minute, we're going to pull up 3 images one by one. In the second pull, I'll just ask you to move on to the first image, not quite yet. What I want you to do is, when you see the first image, just take 30 to 45 seconds just to look at that image, work around the image with your eyes, look at the bigger picture, maybe hone in on details, and just try and work out what you think that image is saying to you. And there's no right or wrong answer here. I want you to kind of pull out what you see in the image, not what you think someone is trying to tell you about the image. And just, if you've got any comments about the image, before we move on to the next one, just unmute yourself and share it with the group and tell us what you think you see. And don't feel that you have to give, as I said, a right or wrong answer. It's whatever you think you see in the image. Is that okay, everyone? Yeah, so Paul, if we could jump onto that first image, please. So just take half a minute, 45 seconds. Is that pixelating a bit on the right? Can everyone see that image okay?
There's something obscuring it on the right, like a grey. Oh, that's gone now. Okay, that's better.
I think it's just Zoom, isn't it?
I've just learned how to do that.
Ah,
It's taken me 18 months.
Cool.
So as you look at it, just work around the whole image and look at the details as well as the bigger picture. And if you feel ready, feel free to unmute yourself and just share any comments with the group. Anybody like to jump in?
I think it's just a child drawing a story about somebody going into a building for a door and needing a key.
I hadn't noticed that. I think maybe his mum or dad, or maybe his dad is in jail.
Oh, yes.
So he's disturbed.
Good spot, Marcus, on the detail there.
I hadn't spotted that. I just thought he was doing his homework, and he was clearly a creative because all his pens were messy.
Anybody else like to share anything on that picture before we jump on to the next one?
I think he's a very creative child. He's got sequins on the floor. I agree with the key. He's a very relaxed, to me, he's a very relaxed child. His clothing is relaxed. He looks really relaxed. He has the ability to throw his pencils on the floor without obviously not worrying about who's going to tell him to pick them up, or now anyway. So yeah, I see him as quite a relaxed child.
I think that's all young boys, isn't it?
And the floor drope, which most teenagers seem to have as well, with the mess.
Yeah.
Okay, should we, if everyone's happy, should we jump onto the second image? Okay, anybody like to share any comments?
It feels to me about sort of friendship and fun is what I kind of get from this particular image.
I think the boy in the background is he's a little bit shy and he's slightly embarrassed and he's possibly going to tell. I thought at first he may be going to share a secret, a disturbing secret, but I think he's about to tell something that's happened to him that's funny. He's got a slight smile on his face.
Thanks, Paul.
I see basically an activity that they're enjoying together. They could be brothers or friends. In the first image, I thought the boy in the red was maybe lonely, but then this image has given another story or another feeling.
Thanks, Martin.
I've got smile, anticipation, shared space, and engaged.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great.
I think he's smiling through a question he's asked or about to ask.
I've got something completely different. I suspect that the person in red may actually be a lady.
Yeah.
And that actually this is something to do with a relationship between a young woman and a child character, and yet who we don't know who that is yet, but that's what I suspect. I think this is the changing nature of what you see from the first picture to the second picture is an unfolding story, basically. And this is actually a young woman who was probably doing something different to what we thought in the first image.
Thank you.
I might be wrong.
Okay, should we jump onto the third image, Paul, if you could?
This is a happy relationship. And that child's definitely a boy. That's his mum.
How can you tell that from the back?
Intuition.
Yeah, I think it's so.
Brass trap.
I also think it's Nick's son and his wife. But anyway, I could be wrong there.
I read her more as a maybe a carer, or like the two boys are in a home and this woman looks, I don't know whether I feel it's his mother.
Well, I first thought it perhaps as a teacher, but given the sequence of stories, it's probably mum that it's been a bit of homeschooling, maybe.
I'm going to throw out there, Nick, this is a non-binary relationship, and the person in the hoodie that we've been worrying about their gender is quite a fluid person. Doesn't sit on either side of the camp.
Well, I think you're obviously there being very, very politically correct there, aren't we? We've got everything in this morning.
I think I might be in the wrong. I think I might be in the wrong meeting because I've got no idea or a clue what anything's going on apart from the three pictures. I've no idea. I'm clueless.
And Rod, that comment is absolutely fine too, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
Did you take these photographs, Nick?
I did, yes.
I feel a bit like Martin that, and I hope this isn't your wife and son, Nick, but like a kind of a social worker, that kind of it. Maybe there's that kind of there's a friendliness there, but a kind of a distance that's not motherly from this. Maybe is what I'm kind of getting.
Thanks, Ollie. Everyone happy? They feel they've shared their thoughts and comments?
Yeah.
So Paul, just before, let's not jump onto the next chart yet.
Right.
I'll just talk you through a little bit about, I think, why these images have maybe created so much variety of comments and feedback. I think it's quite interesting when you look at an image. You know, a photograph is a moment in time. It captures a snapshot. You know, it's a millisecond. We don't know all the context around the image, and yes, we might have taken 3 images in the sequence of a story, but there could be maybe 100 images in the sequence. If we had 100 images, you'd probably have a very full picture. But interestingly, when we see the pictures without the words, it's actually quite difficult to draw out the full story, and that's a bit why we're probably getting slightly different perspectives on the overall story. Maybe depending on where we're coming from, how we see the images, we've got our own attitudes, or we just interpret the expressions slightly differently. Expressions are quite difficult to read sometimes when you don't have all the context. So I think maybe if we can just jump onto the next chart, and I'll actually then just talk you through.
Can I just interject? I was just going to say the reason we chose these 3 is the beginning, middle, and end. So we're just coming back to the story. Sorry, I just wanted to put that in.
Oh, thank you, AnnMarie.
Sorry.
So actually, I'm going to give you some context now as to what, and maybe the words now overlaid on these images will give you some context. And as AnnMarie said, these were taken as part of a process with a start and a kind of a middle where we built the story and an end. These were actually taken for a charity called Action on Addiction, based in Wiltshire, who help families and individuals work through recovery after addiction. And that could be any kind of addiction. And what they do is they bring, particularly where there's a family setting involved, they bring the children and the families in. Often the parents may have had addiction counselling, but then because the addiction can have such a big impact on the children as well in the family setting, the children are encouraged through creative therapy to draw how they feel. It helps them, unlock their feelings without having to talk about them. Quite often teenagers don't want to talk about how they feel. So by drawing, they can actually express that. And I think it's quite interesting in the first picture, the boy had access to all those, and it is a boy, the boy had access to all those colourful pens, and he chose to draw in black. The image was of him being locked. So the impact of the addiction on the family locked him in. Through the discussion that I heard, he wasn't able to have friends around to the house. His family didn't operate the way other families operated because of the impact of the addiction. So he felt kind of closed and unable to kind of get out into the world because of the impact of addiction on him, or his parents' addiction on him. The second stage moves the journey on. We move into the middle. Again, it's part of the recovery process, but that's where children are encouraged to talk to other children and share their feelings with their peers. Again, part of that letting go process and expressing how they feel and how the addiction has impacted on them. At the same time, their parents are still going through that counselling process. And then the final image in the story, as AnnMarie mentioned earlier, is about trying to bring some closure to the process. Now, in this situation, there's been a rebuilding of relationships. We're communicating a positive end in that the mother in this situation, who may well have been the person with the addiction, we've seen some positive outcome. The counselling may have helped. And there's a rebuilding of relationships between the mother and the son. But it could have easily been the other way around. It might not have, as AnnMarie said, it might not have had a happy ending. There may have still been a need for further counselling, or the relationship might have broken down. But what we are trying to communicate here is the positive impact of counselling. So we've tried to communicate a positive end to the story. So I don't know, how do you feel about how those images come together as a story compared to what you thought you saw initially when you saw the images out of context and without any words?
Obviously, I've got something to say on this. But first of all, very nice images, Nick. They work really well as a series, work really well together. Very nice indeed. Photography is totally subjective, and that is the power of photography, because everybody brings their own story to an image. There is no resolution. And that is why photography is so good for marketing, because when people see a photograph, it gets imprinted in their consciousness because they are involved in that photograph. And that's why it is so good for marketing, I believe.
My thoughts there were that if you were to see a film and there was no sound, you would get certain things. If you see a film with subtitles and you can't keep up with those subtitles, or you see a film where the audio is not that great, somehow it disturbs it. But when you bring the story, as Nick's just said it, together with images that match that, you start to, I'm starting to think, as he was telling that story, I was putting myself in that position and thinking of that place. I was thinking it was somewhere in Wiltshire for some reason, but that could be because of Nick, I don't know. But I think when you combine the power of graphic images, photography, with stories, you've got something quite powerful. And
absolutely. I think what's interesting here is that all I've shared with you really is a bullet point title for each image. You know, if this was part of maybe an article or a bigger piece, if AnnMarie was writing a story to go with these images, you know, we would have a lot more information that would fill the gaps and would really build and develop the story much further. And it could be that it's more than 3 images. It could be, you know, a series of images. But that depth of then written storytelling would really bring these images to life and take them to another level.
So in terms of what I was seeing in the individual images and then going on to the sequence, I mean, the sequence is very strong with the captions underneath, but it made me think that what seems to be happening quite a lot in the media at the moment is that if you just pick up on a Google page, they don't give you the caption. They leave the photograph there and you have to figure out what is being said. And I find that quite disconcerting because it can be anything. So yeah, it's quite powerful. I find that quite powerful.
What kind of context are you talking about there, Helen? Sorry, where you see
sometimes you sort of click on a story, you know, you think, okay, here's the story. Let me see what that's got to say. And yet when you get to the story, they're not saying anything about it really, but they're leaving you with a photograph. I've come across it a few times, and they are quite powerful images, which could take you in any direction. And I think it's there to possibly incite or to give the media more grip on a particular story or where they'd like it to go. Yeah, photography is very powerful.
I think the media is certainly controlling the narrative. It has done for 18 months. Yeah. And I think we need to teach people how to read that narrative. It's not always what it is, you know.
And that's kind of where Nick and I are coming from really this morning. As Nick's previously mentioned, it's not just what you're seeing, it's what you're hearing and it's what you're reading, and it's about the whole picture. And we've just picked 2 elements. We've picked the visual and the written element to combine together, which are incredibly powerful. But as we go on through our presentation and you guys get to do some work, you'll be exploring that in a little bit more depth. And it really is just understanding how powerful what we say, do, see, hear, etc. is, and how we can use that in our marketing message, or, you know, whatever we choose to do in a positive way, even if it's a negative story.
Yeah.
So hopefully you're feeling now as if your kind of creative mind is fully warmed up. So if everyone's happy to move on, what we'll do now, Paul, if you could just move on to the next chart for a second. We're going to move out into the breakout session now, which AnnMarie is going to facilitate. So we'll just give you a quick introduction, and then we'll take you out into separate groups. And if we'll ask, in fact, AnnMarie, perhaps if you kind of lead it from here, and then we'll explain what happens next.
Yeah, so for the ladies in the room, we have a rather handsome chap, or not, maybe, I don't know. So this is the image that you're going to be looking at in your groups. What we want you to do is have about 10 minutes to discuss this image in the same way as we've just been through the images that Nick presented, and create a story. And we're looking at exactly what we've just covered. So when you come back, we just have one person to share the story that you have created around this image. Yeah, sorry, next slide, Paul, please, that'd be brilliant. And just consider the elements of storytelling that we've just been through. So the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then a really, really, really good way to always generate a story is to ask these simple questions that we often forget. Who, what, why, where, when, and how, I think has fallen off the bottom of the slide. But who is he? What is he doing? Where is he? Why is he there? When is it taking place? How did he come to be there? Just start asking those questions and you will start to pull together a story around this image. I can't remember what's on the next one, Paul. Sorry, I've forgotten what was. There we go. The reason we do that from a written word perspective is because it enables you to connect on an emotional level. So we do this with characters when we're developing fiction stories. In fact, anything that you're writing, it's a really good way of connecting with it. The reason you need to connect is because that will come out in what you say, and that then means that your readers will connect with you on an emotional level, and that is what you want. If you can get your readers to connect with you emotionally, then you've got a great story and you've got your readers' attention. So I think if we're ready, Nick, anything else to?
Yeah, could you, before you jump off into your breakout groups, if you can screenshot the image, then at least you'll have a copy of that image that you can take with you into the groups, if you're all happy to screenshot. Otherwise, it will very quickly forget how he looks.
He's a very good-looking chap. We won't forget. Okay, is everybody back?
Anne-Marie's been hooked in, clearly.
Perfect.
Yes.
Did everybody have a spokesperson?
Yes.
Yes.
Debbie.
Brilliant.
Next.
Right, room 1. I'm assuming the rooms were 1, 2, and 3. Who was in room 1, and who was the spokesperson?
I don't think people. I don't think people.
Well, we're not 1, 2, and 3. I was in 2, so I just assumed they were 1, 2.
Oh,
and 3.
you knew who they were.
Oh.
I was with Andy, Hook, and Martin, and Mel. So Martin was with our representatives. I don't know whether Martin.
I think we were room 1. I think so.
Well, let's go for it, Martin.
Martin,
Okay.
you up for first?
Yeah, the great story. Okay, the handsome chap, we decided he was called Duncan, and he grew up in a very hard place in Glasgow called Gorbals. His father worked in the docks, and his mother suffered from an alcohol problem. So he had a troubled time at school, and he really didn't know what to do with his life as he came towards the end of his school. So what he did decide was to go into the army. He felt that he didn't want to carry on with his academic career, and so he felt that was a place where he was going to forge his life. So he worked his way up through the army. He became, in the end, at some point, he became a sergeant. He enjoyed his time in the army, but he was then sent on a tour of duty in Afghanistan. And it was sort of during that time that he suffered quite a lot of trauma of the things that he saw there. So on returning from that tour, as the government started to pull the soldiers out of Afghanistan, he was suffering from PTSD. He was sort of in a place of depression. But over time, we felt that he sort of started to put himself together piece by piece. And in his eyes, there was a certain amount of determination. And he also felt that he'd gone through so much in life, from his childhood through the army to where he was now, that he wanted to give back. And so he was now training as a counsellor to help young families that suffered from a disadvantaged background. So we felt that there was a resolution from where he had come from. So yeah, that was basically the story, I think.
Fantastic. That's
Well
brilliant.
done.
Yeah, that is
Well
incredible.
done. Yeah, well done.
Thanks, Martin.
Perfect. Brilliant. Okay, room 2, which I think is the one I was in. Ewan?
Yeah.
By the way, I'll just say disclaimer, I haven't contributed to this.
No.
Slacker.
So ours went on from a slightly different tangent. Our protagonist is William. William is a web designer, very successful, very hardworking. And William, it's on a very important day for William because it's the day that his wife has just been, Anne, and she's just dropped off. And he's spent some time with his son Hamnet for the last couple of hours. And they've had a wonderful time, and it just occupies all of his time, and it's the best day of the week for him. And he looks forward to this. You know, he's a very hard worker, and he looks forward to this all the time. And unfortunately, that time has come to an end. And he stood by the window of his house, and he's just looked out, and he's just watched Anne and Hamnet walking down the street to their car, and they've just gone out of sight. And he's sort of left thinking, how has it come to this? You know, everything that he did that he thought he was doing the right thing. He thought he was working hard. He was putting all the hours he could in to make the life for him and his family the best it could possibly be. And yet it's all gone, and he can't understand why. And maybe he's just hit him that actually the reason probably why was because he was spending all of his time trying to earn money and trying to do the things that were right. But actually what he ended up doing was neglecting his family. And he's just had that realization that actually probably rather than being anyone else's fault, this actually has all come down to his fault, even if it was not intentional. And he wishes that actually maybe if he could turn back time, he could have made it different.
God, I'm in tears.
Yeah. Oh dear. I need to go and get the tissues now, I think.
Brilliant. Okay, perfect. Excellent. And the final room.
Oh dear. What on you?
Right. Ours is extremely different from all of yours. So this guy is an estate agent. His name is David. This is actually taken just yesterday morning. It's basically what happened was, he grew up, was never really in, the good bits of school. Like, he didn't really study very much. He left school at 16, had like 1 GCSE or 2 or something like that. Went on and decided that he had to do something with his life. He didn't want to. He started off working in, out doing labouring and so on. And then a friend of him once told him that he could become an estate agent. And so he looked at it and thought, yeah, go on, let's give it a go. So anyway, he was actually quite good at it because he sort of got the gift of the gab and so on. But the thing is, he's also a massive football fan. And so Sunday night, he and his friends obviously went out, and they were watching the match. It's a sad story. And they were watching the match, and obviously, I'm not laughing. It's sad. I'm crying actually. And obviously, they were, they lost. And then he and his friends, they were really angry. And the thing is with David is that he had quite a short temper, and so he was very angry. They were fighting a little bit in the in the pub, and then when he went home, he was so drunk and he didn't really realise what was going on. But he's a bit of an abusive guy as well, unfortunately. So he was very cruel to his wife when he got home because she didn't really know what was going on, and she got angry with him because he'd spent all the money and because he was drunk, and they had a bit of a fight, a scuff, and so on. And anyway, so then they went to bed, obviously very angry. She was really upset. She was, just distraught, really. And then the next morning, this is him. Yesterday morning, he's looking, just leaning against a door or wall, thinking, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done with my life? as in, you know, we've lost the football, and that was something that he'd really been hoping for. You know, it was pretty much the most important thing in his life at the time. And then obviously his wife is really upset, and he's hurt her again, because he's done it quite a lot whenever they've had, you know, when he's not been very happy, and he's thinking, I've got to sort myself out. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Well advised.
Thank you. I don't know whether there was a bit of influence from an experience there. No. Oh, can we put back to the slides, Paul, please?
Yes. Let me just.
Thank you very much. So really, the comment to make about that, you had a very short space of time. You were all given the same media, and obviously you all interpreted it very, very differently. What's interesting is that you all interpreted it as a sad story because of his expression. But when you were talking and hopefully listening to each other, you were able to connect and identify with that person. So he became David, he became William, he became, I've forgotten what was he called to start with?
Duncan,
sorry, that was it. He became that person as you were listening to the story. So next slide, please. Well, in fact, this is the last one. Thank you. So just to conclude, really what we've done is we've had a bit of fun around storytelling, and it's about connection. It's as simple as that. It isn't a science. It really isn't difficult, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What you need to do is just think about what matters to you, because that's going to matter to your readers as well. So think about when you're looking at your marketing, when you're looking at your social media, what do you read that connects with you? Why does it connect with you? And that's then how you're going to start looking at what you can portray that will connect with your readers. Every single one of you has connected around the stories that you've just created around Duncan, David and William. And that's really all it's about. And we just used the very, very simple premise: who, what, why, where, when and how, beginning, middle and end. And that was all we did. And you've all come up with these incredible stories. And the last point, which has fallen off the bottom of the slide, unfortunately, is that inspiration is everywhere. I touched on it earlier. Obviously, we've looked at the visual and the written word, but think about what you can smell, what you can hear. Use your senses and just take a moment to pause and then reflect. And if you have a particular smell for some reason that is pertinent to you, well, chances are that's pertinent to somebody else. So that can form part of your marketing if it fits with your message. So that's kind of really what I wanted to say, is it isn't a science, it's just about connecting with people. Nick.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd like to add is I think it's really important to remind ourselves that we might be a cake maker or a web designer or a funeral specialist, but we're also, as AnnMarie said, we're all storytellers, and we need to remind ourselves that actually we can all tell fantastic stories. And I think quite often, as we've just shown through this exercise, sometimes if you overthink something, it's actually quite difficult to create the story. But actually, if you force yourself to think more creatively in a more fluid way, the stories can come out and can flow really easily. And I quite often encourage my clients when I'm trying to get them to think about their storytelling is, sometimes you might get an idea when you're in the shower, when you're on a walk, wherever you get those ideas, just note them down and you'll build up these stories over time. And then you can weave them into your marketing, when the time is right. But it works differently for everybody. There's no right or wrong way to do this. But I think it's just, hopefully the process has shown you what a wonderfully creative process it can be and how you can create some really powerful content that you can use to promote your own businesses. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that AnnMarie, and I hope you found it useful too.
Nick, AnnMarie, I think everybody would agree that has been excellent. So very well woven stories. Really enjoyed that. I've got any questions on that, or observations or points? I do want to bring in Debbie and Andy at some point, so stick around for that. But I think the challenge that maybe we've got in marketing and that we might take away from here is the danger is perhaps, do you not find, telling stories at random? When we're in conversation in the pub, of course, those stories are random and they bounce off each other and it's quite natural. Does anybody else find that when it comes to bringing a story into our marketing, as we feel we ought to and what this is about, that there's somehow a difficulty? Anybody? No? Only Marcus? Me? I must admit, I found that a challenge, and I've made one or two notes here. I liked AnnMarie's point, which is spot on. You know, that when you're in conversations with people and you're marketing, you're in front of the right audience. Your audience is about taking them from where they are now to where they would like to be or need to be, or whether they're interested in being, on that A to C journey. And your job is to take them there, and featured today was about that story to take them where we've said in the past that facts tell but stories sell. So it's about choosing the right story for the right audience, I suppose. And what the note I made is that there needs to be some purpose of telling the story. Otherwise, you're just telling jokes and, you know, they're all at random. So the story has to be relevant to them, because the marketing is about them, not you. And the first thing I put is the art of getting people to tell their stories. Otherwise, you've got trying to do a catch-all. You know, in Andy's case, it could be that a Volvo estate is the answer for everybody because he's got stocks of them or a deal on them. And it isn't. It's about finding out where is their A, B, where is their A and where is their C, and how would we get people to take us from A to B by telling their story. I think the real art to begin with is trying to get them to tell us their story.
I think that comes from being able to share our stories. And depending on what audience you're with, as you've obviously just said there, Paul, I don't know, say you are selling Volvos for argument's sake, and you're looking to take that person from A to C, but you don't really know what their B is. And the B could be the bit that's actually the sticking point. You know, that could be the bit where you need to dig in a little bit. And often if you can empathise or show that you understand, even if you don't know what their B is, you know, you could say something like, oh, you know, my experience with Volvos is this, I hear, you know, is this, and you share your own experiences, and it's having confidence in your own experiences that they have validity, which will then draw out that person's B, if you like, which is their sticking point. And you can then talk around it. So often sharing something of you is the best way to bring out something of them.
Yeah. And I think I should have, the caveat to that was when I was talking when I was in a face-to-face situation. I think you're spot on. If you're on in the printed word, or you are on video, or if you're on outward bound marketing, you've got to lead with your story. Well, perhaps I'd skipped a little bit, and that's my nature, is when I'm talking to people, I try and get their story. So you're absolutely spot on there, AnnMarie. Murad had a point, and then Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story I use all the time, and it's a true story, and it happened to me with a family where the young 25-year-old son wanted to desperately see his mother, who'd suddenly died. And no one else in the family wanted to see the mother, and everybody knew that she'd gone for a post-mortem, and it wasn't going to be the greatest thing to go and see, really. And so I just asked the young lad, 25-year-old, I said, tell me an experience that you've recently had with your mother that really jumps up in your memory. Oh, Christ, he said, 3 weeks ago, we were out in the garden. We were having a bloody water fight. I couldn't believe it. She chucked a bucket of water all over me. I was bloody soaking wet. I got the hose pipe. Anyway, it went on like this for about 20 minutes. And I said to him, if you don't mind me saying so, and you're welcome to come and see your mum, we'll get her prepared and we'll put her in a coffin in the chapel of rest. But do you really want to change that image that you've just described to me for the image that I've just described to you? Now, you don't have to make your mind up now. You can think about it over the weekend, but ring me if you don't want to see your mum, or ring me if you do. Just ring me, you know. And I left that with him. And before I left the house, he had decided he didn't want to see his mum. And I use that story every single time someone wants to see their loved one.
That's quite powerful, that.
Yep.
Anybody else? Anybody else ever use stories that, yes, Marcus?
Oh, so what I was going to say was, I'm in my content on LinkedIn or whatever, I find it hard telling stories. I find it hard talking about myself. I know, hard to believe. But yeah, I do find it hard. What I do find easy, though, for obvious reasons, is of teaching things. I find it easy sharing information and giving information. Is there a way that I can combine both teaching and storytelling?
Yeah, so there is, and it's that when people connect, it's because they can relate to you. So you can sit here and you can tell me that I need to buy this camera because it's going to make me take this photograph, and you might be giving me the best advice in the world, but I've got nothing to hang that on because I don't know you. I don't know what you're, you know, I don't know anything about you. You could just be saying it because you get a kickback if I buy that camera. Okay, so that's kind of the teaching side of it. Now you're telling me, you're giving me that information for the best reasons because you know it's going to do the job that it needs to do, and if I put it on this exposure and have this light, it's going to give me everything I need. I don't know that, so I'm relying on your expertise. Now that's part of the story, but the other part of the story is I need to buy into you. So what you need to do is add elements of yourself into there that you are comfortable with. And it's a journey. Becoming comfortable with yourself and your story is a journey. And you start with very, very small steps. And nobody's saying that you go out there and suddenly tell the world your most intimate secrets. That's not what it's about. What it's about is saying, when I was starting out, I didn't really know what I was doing. So I tried this, or I tried that. And I know by trying those things that actually this was the best solution for me. And what you're doing is showing that you're human and that you're fallible and that you've made mistakes and that you're not this all-seeing, all-dancing, all-knowing expert, because we all know those people that want to sell us the world and they have absolutely no knowledge of what it's going to do for us. You don't want to be that person. So as soon as you start telling me how your journey has been, how it's affected you, how you've learned, the processes you've gone through, the ups and the downs, I'm going to be more inclined to say, actually, do you know what, Marcus, that's a really good recommendation you've given me, because I can tell that you've given it to me for the right reasons because you've been on that journey.
That's a really good answer. Thank you.
I think showing a vulnerability in your story is, as AnnMarie said, very, very important, because you're making that connection straight away. You're showing you're vulnerable, and as AnnMarie says, that you are you're showing you're human. You're actually showing that you were where they were there, that you were where they are in their story. I was chatting to a guy on Zoom last week, And I noticed on his LinkedIn profile, he was claiming to be an expert in marketing and an expert in something else. And I do know this guy, and I wryly said, did he get a badge for that? And he said, what? I said, being an expert. He said, no, it's what other people have said about me. And I thought, you know, Nick.
Yeah, can I just build on what AnnMarie was saying there? I think I'm very similar to what Marcus has just described in terms of, I'm not overly private, but I don't share everything. And I think we're all on that journey, aren't we? I think if you're normally quite a private person and suddenly you go out and share everything to the world, that wouldn't look real. And I think you've got to kind of find your comfortable place and decide what's appropriate for you. And it doesn't mean that with time you can't share more as you become more comfortable sharing information about yourself. And AnnMarie wrote a piece about me, which was published on LinkedIn. And I'm sure for AnnMarie it felt quite normal, but for me it felt incredibly vulnerable to put that kind of stuff out into the real world, because I've never done it before. It was a great experience to do it, and AnnMarie managed to kind of tease information out of me and weave it into a story which, you know, I could never have done. But it's I don't know how everyone else feels, whether you feel like it's quite a scary place to be, or
yes. Ollie.
Yeah, totally, Nick. I mean, I get all of this in personal relationships and the kind of groups I'm involved in and things like that. And there's a lot of sharing that goes on in that. I mean, the Buddhist community in it, and it's kind of very natural. But then applying this to work and my kind of marketing and social media and things like that, that's the bit which is the kind of sticking point for me, which I kind of trying to figure out, okay, how can I, like sort of saying there, Nick, like revealing a bit and just forming that connection with the customers and potential clients, but also having that kind of, being private still and not wanting to be totally gushing and kind of, you know, pouring out everything there. So I think it's, that's the bit for me, which I kind of struggle with, this kind of balance there. Yeah.
And that's really part of, sorry, Paul, that's part of why I did what I did with Nick in terms of his story. It's about helping you to understand that you don't need to share everything. If you want to, fine, but you don't need to. You know, what Nick gave me were very, very small glimpses into his life, but it was enough to give him a three-dimensional appearance, and that's what you need.
Do you not think it's Martin, by the way, did you have a point? Did you want to? No, right. Very often it's those poses. You not think, though, that in business, and it's been a while since we've been to live networking meetings, when you say, how are you? How's business? And we all know this, we want to be positive, and there's that pretense that we make. And somebody said the other day, I think it was Andrew, be careful, everybody has got their own challenges. Everybody's on their own journey. You don't know where it is. And so there's that feeling that you've got to put that facade, not a facade, but you've got to show how you expect them to be rather than how you are. Now, you don't want to go in and be all miserable, etc. But do you not think that's part of the problem with revealing your vulnerability? I think that I had that as an issue. Certainly, I felt people needed to feel I was confident. It was only when I was genuinely confident and grounded that I could afford to be really authentic. And that isn't that authentic.
We all do. Yeah, and we all do. And that's why you do it bit by bit. Because you just need to get comfortable with the bit that you're revealing and realize that, okay, I've told the world that I'm 65 when they thought I was 60 or whatever it might be. And actually the world is still turning and I'm still alive and nothing's happened. And you kind of move on to the next and you move on to the next. And it's just, you give just enough to be human. Because if you think about it, if we go into this room and you've got the speaker up on stage and they're this kind of, we all know the type of person, and they're the big arrogant, and you just think, really? We don't want to know that person. But if they then come off stage and reveal something about themselves that you can relate to, it becomes a very different relationship.
Well, the relate and the relationship was what I just picked up there. It's about that communication. You want people to really relate and connect. Rod, you had a point.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are perception. You've got to portray the trouble is that we're having to portray an image that we think people want to see. Now, if you take me for an example, so I'm talking about me now. So I all my vehicles are liveried up and they've got their own personal plate with WFS on it. I want to give a corporate image, even though I'm a small business, because I want people to be confident that I can deliver what I say I can deliver. And yet my whole ethos is around the vulnerability, and your success and your weaknesses are related. So my success is that I offer a non-fragmented approach. So you only get me, but guess what? If I'm ill, you don't get anybody. So there's an issue around that. So you know, for me, it's about, I know what people, they've got lots of perceptions, and you know, you've got to fulfill the image that they want, because otherwise they ain't going to buy from you.
I think when they say they, of course, is that sometimes we also fall into the trap of being all things to all people. Rod is not everybody's cup of tea. I am not everybody's cup of tea, you know, for various aspects, but you don't need to be, because you can't be all things to all people. There's too many of them. Andy, I want to bring in Andy and Debbie, and it's not one of those meetings where we have a minute that runs into 20 minutes where everybody explains what they do, because it's not about that. But Andy, you've been nodding on one or two things. Do you want to tell us your story briefly and what's resonated so far? Or
yeah, so I'm a leasing broker, set up my own independent company probably nearly 4 years ago now. Like lots of people, had many trials and tribulations over the last couple of years. And the one thing that I keep coming back to is, as you just mentioned, Paul, is we can't be all things to all people. So part of what it's taken me probably best part of those 4 years to realize is that I'm not the solution for everybody. So, you know, in the sort of recent times, I've sort of refined it back that, you know, I am a leasing broker for busy, you know, small business owners, you know, because those are the ones where I add the most value, and they're like me, they're time poor, you know, so that's where I can add most value and work best with. So yeah, so the storytelling thing is a constant thing that we all go through. You know, when you're talking to a new client, number one, to add validation to them for me and what I do, but equally to eke out from them what they actually require.
Yeah. So I'd imagine, I mean, that in itself is good, because I like the fact that you say you're not all things to all people, and you've identified your audience. And sometimes, and we've had 2 or 3 sessions on this, I think the audience is key to it all, to be, you know, for the whole way forward. You can't begin to go forward until you know exactly who that audience is. We can get confused about that. Thanks for that, Andy. Debbie, do you want to unmute and tell us your story, and maybe if there's anything that's resonated today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been sort of self-employed doing different, I was a singer before lockdown and so on, and that was my thing for years. And then the last few months I've started up a sort of therapy business, basically. So it was really early days. So this is really interesting for me. And actually, with storytelling and, you know, letting a little bit out about yourself, I'm quite a private person. I don't really like to tell people things that have gone on in my life. But I know, I mean, I've been doing, the last few months, I've been on a few, not necessarily networking things, but, you know, like how to become a good coach, how to do this, you know, how to get your audience, how to get clients, and so on and so forth. And with a lot of them, I've noticed that they've said, you know, you should tell people your story. Like, you should tell people how, you know, the terrible things that have happened in your life, and yet how you came through it. And, you know, now you can help them too. And that's something that I personally feel a bit uncomfortable with. And I've seen a lot of videos of people, of therapists or coaches who, you know, say, oh, you know, I was hurt, I was this, I was that, but I came through it and now I can help you with it, and so on. And I think, oh God, I don't like it. I don't like seeing people, you know, like put their washing out in front of you, basically, is how I think of it. So yeah, so I find it quite interesting. And I suppose I'm trying to work out what the level is, you know, like how much do you have to tell people about yourself in order to be authentic, or to be, I don't know, like respected as the person to go to, you know? I guess that's where I am at the moment. Yeah.
Isn't that a bit of a juxtaposition? What do I need to say to be respected? And what do I need to say to be authentic? What would you say to that, AnnMarie?
Yeah, and it's 100%. And that's what I hear a lot with a lot of people that I work with. And you're absolutely right, because every single one of us in this room could sit here and tell a sob story. But is it real? Does it add to us? Does it mean that we are the best person to do business with because we've got a really sad story? No. So whilst the advice that you've been getting is correct in as much as put yourself out there, there is too much. You know, you only have to go on LinkedIn or any of the other social medias, and every other person is telling you how to live your life and how they've done this and transformed themselves. And I don't know about anybody else, but I just go, really? And I just scroll past and I scroll past. So you're exactly right. It's the balance. It's being true to yourself and giving enough of yourself, because that actually makes you more valid than someone that's giving everything, which is why I said, you know, you just do bit by bit what feels right, what feels relevant, and you will find that balance. And if you ever want to have a chat, just give me a shout.
Thank you.
I think also, if it's coming from you, from a heartfelt, you'll know, because AnnMarie said there's certain things that don't resonate there, but if the right person with the right story was to tell it, right person for you, then there would be a connection. I think I mentioned to you, I'm working on a project with men that over 40 with belly fat, and I during the week I recorded a video introduction to my partner in the States who's got this program. And it's all about a story. It's all about my story from a weight point of view. I couldn't tell that if I didn't have a problem. Now, I don't have a massive weight problem, but I did have a triple heart bypass 3 years ago. So I thought that was well worth telling about where my journey had come to the whole issue of weight, working with the Lions for the Wells diabetes, etc. So I'll let you know how that does. But I think but that felt really comfortable to me, because it was honest, and I didn't have any issues with it. There was no script at all. Don't work with a script. And it's when you leave your agenda aside and just take, I know we've got an agenda with what we're trying to do, but I think when you take it from the heart, people can see it and feel it. Definitely. Anybody else, any other points from today? What I'd like to do, therefore, is to, as we'd normally do, is to begin a wind up and just go around the room and just see whether there's been one particular takeaway from today's meeting. And I'll start with Mel.
Yeah, I think it re-emphasised what I try to do, and that is to, when I'm communicating with both prospects and clients, is to put myself in what I'd call the minds of the consumer, and if I was them, what would I like to hear? And that's the story that I like to get across.
Yeah, I think people's ability to do that, and not everybody has it, because it tends to be about me, putting yourself, thinking about them, and maybe asking the questions as well, and that you want to do. You really want to connect with people that you want to connect with. Thanks, Mel. Martin.
Yeah, thanks to AnnMarie, and I really enjoyed today. I thought it was a sort of breakout session, and just this whole thing around storytelling and how I'm still not sure exactly what my story is, but it's things like this really help you on that journey, and give you a better idea of where you want to go in how you're going to tell your story, or how you're going to get a story from a client. So it's really good.
I think so. Martin, I can completely resonate with that, because when you start this whole business of stories, you think, why is my story interesting? Where do I begin? But I suppose I think somebody else has got to help you, but they've got to tease out the story, because we're perhaps looking at the story from where we are now to where we want to be, but really we need to start much earlier than that. Somebody needs to ask you and to tease, and maybe AnnMarie's a perfect person, clearly a perfect person to do that. It's not easy to tell your own story. No, it is easy to tell your own story. It's not easy to think of what that story is. Would you say that, AnnMarie?
Yeah, because it's like everything, because you're so close to it, you're either too precious about it or you just think it's boring. And the amount of people that say, oh, yeah, but nothing's happened to me. Okay. By the end of the hour, you can guarantee something's happened to them. And on that point, really, I said it to Debbie, but if anyone here just wants to bash some ideas around with me for an hour or so, just give me a shout. I'm more than happy to do that. If you just want to explore, you know, ideas around what you can and, you know, what you can pull out from your experiences, then I'm more than happy to do that with anybody. So just give me a shout.
That's great, AnnMarie. If you put your sort of contact details in the chat, that would be great. Andy, just anything you've got from today? What have you got?
Well, yeah, thanks to AnnMarie and Nick, obviously, for giving us the ideas to how to start using story a bit more efficiently. There are lots of stories, especially, you know, only having worked in the motor industry and seen various departments, you know, and there's what goes on behind closed doors, those sorts of things. There's plenty of stories to be used to add vulnerability for my story, and it's just now how to drop them all in the right way, really, and make use of them. Yeah.
I think in sales also, we very often can use the stories of other customers that are like them with the challenges they had. Use their stories, even if you don't have your own.
Because if they can picture it, it doesn't have to be exact, but they can get, I can see what the outcome's going to be. Yeah.
And there's just some emotional involvement. Marcus, I'm sorry about the reference from Debbie about the football when you didn't want to hear anymore, but how about you? What have you got from today?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for Nick and AnnMarie with a sterling job, brilliant job hosting it and going through all the information. Very, very, very good indeed. I've read a few times the book by Donald Miller, The Story Brand. Has anybody else read that book? Yeah, you know, it's quite interesting. It's quite a different approach to how to use stories than what we've been talking about. He talks about how to use stories for marketing, selling products. But yeah, quite interesting. And the takeaway that I've come from it, the thing that I highlighted is show that you're human. I've highlighted that. So I'm trying to be a bit more human.
Well, I thought you were. I think there are other ways in which you can pick up on stories. I think the content today has been certainly excellent. I know that testimonials are a great story because if you use those, there's somebody else's stories. And as I've just said with Andy, sharing other people's experiences. I used to do a lot of that in hairdressing. Debbie, it's good to see you back. You haven't told us your story about your musical career, but maybe if you come back again, that we'll leave that for another time, or even sing us a song or play something or whatever, or lead us in a chorus, leaders. But Debbie, what have you got from today?
Thank you again for today. It's been so interesting. I think it's interesting how, like, with one picture, that it can tell so many different stories, and it's just interesting. Even with the man, that picture, and 3 different, like, completely different stories for one picture, and so it makes me, I suppose, wonder whether like, you have to be so careful, I suppose, in some ways, if you're trying to sell something with a picture, aren't you? It's almost like you need to put, if you want it to say something specific, you've almost got to tell them what it means, because otherwise you can create anything, can't you? So it's really fascinating. It's just, I suppose, pinpointing how you want to get something across.
Maybe when we choose the picture, what story am I trying to tell here? And I tend to use quite a few stock pictures, but obviously that's not entirely authentic, but I'm sure our photographers would agree on that. I'm just going to quickly go back to Martin.
No, just from what Debbie was saying about context, I don't know if anybody remembers, there was a famous sort of advert, probably in the 80s, for the Times. There was like 3 scenes of a skinhead bashing into an old man. And then the final scene was like a piano coming down. So it was sort of like the context was, oh my God, this guy's a thug. He's like just bashing this guy up, but actually he was saving his life from being like smashed over the head. It was I can't remember exactly when, but it was all about that kind of the context of, what you can get from each image. It was
That's very much reminds me of the black guy in the riots, the BLM riots, when he's picking up this other guy and taking him to safety.
Yeah, it was a similar sort of.
That's what made that a very powerful, iconic photograph. Helen, how about you? Your husband's not been in the background today. Has he got a day off?
He is. He's just started a meeting. So
all right.
Yeah, I've realized that a lot of my cake images do need explanations, because there is usually a story attached to them. I've always not done that. I've also always never told anybody much about myself, and I have to figure that story out. So I think I will be talking to AnnMarie. But thank you both, AnnMarie and Nick. It was an amazing session.
That'd be a good idea. Ollie.
Yeah, I think when I think about it, we're all self-employed, and so we've all got really interesting stories, haven't we, to start with it. Yeah, my big takeaway was that I've always thought of like this A to B journey when it comes to a story, and especially when engaging with kind of clients and my audience, but forgetting that there's this middle part to it, which I think has been really powerful today, about how we get them from A to C, and the B is the middle bit. So that's been the big takeaway. And then also there was I don't know if anyone else has read it, a really good book company called the Do Book Company, that do these little books, and they're called there's one called Do Story, that's all about kind of writing story using a bit like AnnMarie was sort of saying, your kind of senses and this gleaming detail. And they do a whole range of them, one called Do Fly I'm reading at the moment, which is about sort of, you were saying about like writing down your kind of your journey almost yourself, and then seeing actually that is quite interesting. So yeah, I found it really, really, as always, really good today. So thank you very much, Nick and AnnMarie, for leading it today so well.
And it's of course not always the business story, it's the person. It's very important, the story behind that person. I've always, part of my nature, and it's just inbuilt now, is to find out, be curious about the person and see whether there's a connection, because that brings people closer together. So if there's any Accrington Stanley fans out there, then we're made. Ewan.
Yeah, great session. Thank you, Nick and AnnMarie. That was really brilliant, and it was really thought-provoking, and the way that you structured it to involve, everyone to do their own thinking, I think worked brilliantly. And for me, it was great to have that structure for building a story. And I think the stories that I'm always interested in telling are not so much about me or us, it's about the way that we've managed to help other people. And it's just great to have that structure. But you've obviously put a lot of work into that, Nick and AnnMarie, and Nick, it came across. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Ewan. Andrew.
Yeah, I thought the workshop was fantastic. I think you use story quite a lot, and it can feel a bit abstract, but to actually go through a workshop that these guys have put together, and like Ewan says, do your own thinking and apply your own sort of thoughts to an image, etc. Really, really fascinating, and it's really kicked it into a very practical, actionable thing now, I think, with regards to our own marketing, rather than something that's abstract that you hear a lot saying, "I'll use a story." So yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll certainly put the recording and with permission, the slides in PDF form, so that you can, maybe in crafting your own story or the stories about people, you can do that. I know Rod's got a funeral to conduct again. He seems to be the story of his life or death. Rod.
Well, that was the florist at the door. So that was me putting flowers in the back of my vehicle, ready for the funeral at 12:30 today. But yeah, no, I found the session very interesting, and thanks to Nick and AnnMarie. I tend to use stories to establish needs. Sometimes you're going to see someone and you think you know what they need, and to give someone else's story as an example helps them think really what they do need, and it teases out of certainly for me, when I'm talking about, certainly about funeral plans, it's about affordability and being able to establish that the person needs what it is they're asking for and that they can afford it.
Well, I know that you as well as being a good storyteller, you do have the ability to tease other people's stories out. So that's a great quality. And finally, but not last but not least, certainly, Chris, you've been very quiet today, but Chris.
I really enjoyed the session too. I thought AnnMarie and Nick did a great job. I thought they delivered, they thought it out, which is fabulous. Nick, Andrew and I are doing a session for the Bath Business Focus in a few weeks' time, and it gave me a lot of clues about how we need to structure that so that we get the best out of it. But I think it's interesting for me because I find that I'm the most chatty boy in the world mostly, but it's making sure that I'm actually delivering the right message on point rather than just having a scattergun approach. And I've been very reluctant lately to post anything up on LinkedIn. I've really seemed to have ground to a halt with it, and I think this may give me a healthy and needed boot up the arse, so I'll get off my tush and actually do something with my social media again. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody today, and particularly to AnnMarie and Nick. That was a really great session. I've got some ideas for some more meetings. There's some more subjects in the next few weeks. And Debbie and Andy, I'll send you a note, and if you want to get on a one-to-one call, I'll be delighted to just to find out a little bit more about how whatever you decide, whether you want to come forward with the group or whatever. You know, I'm here to serve you and maybe help tease out some stories from yourself. I will tell you, I've had a certain opinion about Facebook, but I went on a training last week and I was advised to do one thing, which I did on Sunday morning, and to kickstart the Facebook algorithm. And by the end of the day, I had 260 comments. And Facebook's wondering who the hell is this Paul Clegg? So if that might be of interest to anybody, I'd be delighted to include it in a way to generate audience and response, etc. And I'll share that with you at some time. All the very best to everybody. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, Marcus, in real life, and see you all next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Have a good week.
Bye.
Cheers all. Have a good week.